Welcome, everybody. Welcome for another episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to have with me today Miss Ashlan Wilburn. Ashlan is a senior at Adfontes. Ashlan, welcome. Thanks so much for taking time to join us.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be interviewed.
Absolutely. I look forward to our conversation. Among other things, we'll get to your experience in the House. We'll get to your senior thesis, which I've had the privilege to be your advisor on. But first, a little bit of background, Ashlan. You came to Adfontes as a sophomore, so you've only been here a few years. What was that? Where did you come from? What background did you come from, educationally, and what was that transition like for you?
So I was homeschooled before I came to Adfontes. I'd been homeschooled all the way through elementary school and freshman year. I'd taken some online classes and been to some co-ops before. I just really wanted to have classes with more teachers, and I wanted to get to know more students my age, and I was kind of ready to just leave the bubble of people that I knew and meet some new friends and new teachers. So when I first came to AFA, it was definitely a bigger workload, but I didn't immediately find it wasn't tremendously overwhelming, because the types of subjects I had studied, like the curriculums I had studied, were also classical for the most part, so I was able to find some similarities right away.
Good. So the academic workload then wasn't such a big deal. Were there any other were there any difficulties for you in this transition process?
I think the main difficulty that I remember was learning to take criticism as a positive thing. I remember my summer reading paper. I did not like doing it. It was for Pilgrim's Progress, which I did not enjoy reading.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time on it, and I got a C on the paper. And a lot of other students in that class got like bad grades on that paper, and we were all so mad about it. But I learned to take, and also another assignment that I remember doing badly on was a short story for Mrs. Mathwin in composition. I just didn't really understand the assignment properly, and all of my classmates wrote like deep, thoughtful stories, and I wrote one about a frog. So yeah, another C on that one. And I've seen this with other new students too that take school seriously. Like they're like upset when they get a bad grade, and something I've learned is those bad grades are part of the reason I do well now. My writing has really improved since coming to AFA, but it was a difficulty at first to kind of take it as more of a positive thing than a negative thing, even if it was kind of like gross at first to get those grades.
Yes. And I understand Pilgrim's Progress. I mean, it's not my favorite book either, but it can be shocking. For me, that experience didn't really happen until college. But right, the first time it hits you, it can be disoriented. What helped you get through that initial setback, at least minor academic setback?
I think it was time, honestly. It was time, and just, I don't know. I just kind of had the mentality that at the time that it was going to be kind of difficult, and that I didn't really know that people liked me, which was another thing I would tell like new students. It was kind of a difficulty at the time. Like, most people will like you. So like the teachers they're all trying to help you out, and they're nice, and they don't think you're stupid unless you're like doing something really, really dumb, which usually isn't the case for most people at our school. So yeah, I think part of it was just learning. It was learning to accept criticism and just not being so worried all the time about like what people thought, or about like the work you were doing, or just existing in general. Just
Yeah,
basically take criticism and calm down a little bit.
sure, sure. Well, it's not an easy lesson for anybody to learn. Um, but yeah, so how long would you say it took you, from 10th grade beginning in, September or whatever? How long did it take you in the school year for some of those lessons you just mentioned to sink in for you?
I would say maybe they started to really sink in about halfway through junior year, but probably a little bit before then.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure it took, I don't know. I feel like the summer after my sophomore year, I don't know. I feel like learned a lot of things over like a short couple of weeks. Um, and I don't know. I felt a lot better coming into junior year than I did like coming out of sophomore year. So probably, I don't know. Maybe it took anywhere from like 1 to 6 months into junior year. Maybe it was coming out of sophomore year, or
Mhm.
more like coming into junior year. I
Right.
don't really remember.
Yeah. No. So that's fine. But I mean, I think what you mentioned is that, I mean, it didn't happen over a period of 2 weeks, right?
No.
It took some time to get familiar with teachers, community, and so on. And I hope that can be. Um, yeah, I wasn't aware that you were going to give that answer, but if we think about it, I think maybe that can be encouraging to other students. Like maybe it doesn't have to take that long, but maybe it will.
Right.
Looking back, um, do you think it needed to take that long for you, or were there other things you maybe could have done that maybe could have sped that process up?
Um, I think it was just the way things like panned out, honestly. I think it was just, I don't know. I think I kind of needed that time. It was just like events that were happening. Like, um, so I think it was time, honestly, circumstances, stuff like that. But don't think it needs to take that long for everyone. I think the sort of like, I don't know, growing as a student and just a person, that'll look different for everyone. But I would hope that perhaps everyone's first year isn't perhaps like nerve wracking.
Hmm.
And I don't think it is for everyone.
Sure.
I've seen other new students be more outgoing in their first year, so I don't think it has to take that long.
Right. So, maybe not all of our viewers will know this. And of course, you wouldn't know it unless you saw it. But for the faculty, a lot of the students, your, shall we say, coming out party, quote unquote, was the beginning of junior year with the Archimedes experience. And I think most of us, I myself, kind of assumed you were this nice young lady who was, kind of shy and quiet and retiring, but then, kind of kept to herself. But then at the Archimedes experience, where, for those who don't know, the Archimedes experience is the first major house event of the year. And one of the things it involves is a house cheer. And Athens' cheer was tremendous, but Ashlan, your part in that cheer, so this was like more than a year and a half ago, but very memorable. People still talk about it. You were very loud and brazen and brash, and your
Oh my,
apple pride and dissing of other houses. I think everybody kind of turned and looked at each other like, where did this come from? So, Ashlan, where did it come from? How, like, that to me seemed like the beginning of your kind of integration into our school in a more full way. How did that come about?
I think it mostly came about due to just wanting to help out my friends in Athens, particularly Ellie and Tristan. Um, they kind of took me under their wing. Ellie had from the start, but I really hung out with Ellie and Tristan a lot that year. And I knew that there were some things that they needed help with. And I think what happened was I offered to help out with the event or something, and they were like, "Oh, you could help out with the cheer." And then I I think that I wrote most of it, and they were like, what? What is this? Like, we weren't expecting this, but it was really fun. I don't know. I just enjoyed doing it. I guess that's why. I guess
Yeah.
that's why it was such like a different, I guess, a different attitude for that project, and that event. I just really enjoyed it, and I just had a different attitude, basically an attitude adjustment.
Yeah. Yeah. So for our viewers, Ellie and Tristan were your house leaders. That's correct?
Yes.
Right. You mentioned something to me as we were preparing for this talk, something that really struck me. You said, I started to realize that the way to take the house event seriously was to realize that it's not serious. Can you unpack that a little bit? It seemed like that description of like a house event or house spirit or house competitions, that describes for me exactly what we're looking for. What went through your mind there? Can you unpack that some?
I think what had to happen was, I feel like this is a case for a lot of younger high schoolers in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Like the middle schoolers can be really enthusiastic, particularly in our house this year. I love it. Sometimes for the younger high schoolers, I've kind of noticed, like, at least initially, they don't really want to do anything, and it's almost like they're afraid of looking stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I had kind of felt that a little bit, and partially it was because the Athens vibe when I first joined the school was we're having fun while doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it started to change, and I liked the change. I mean, I always liked the house vibe. It kind of just fit whatever it was. But I think I just realized, first of all, I was having fun with what I was doing, and the way to be successful in these competitions is just, you do have to try, but you can't really get angry about it. I mean, you can't get angry in a way that lasts beyond the competition. So you kind of just have to acknowledge, basically, that yes, you're going to probably look stupid. Like, if an outsider came by, someone came by, they're like, what are these people doing? Like, why are they painted in all these colors? This person's like wearing a green tutu on their head. Like, what is going on here? But I mean, there's still something heroic about some of these competitions, and it is what you make of it, basically. So for me, it was kind of just acknowledging the premise is kind of ridiculous, but there's a lot of growth that can happen here, and you kind of just need to, like, embrace the ridiculous elements of it, and once you do that, you can start taking it more seriously.
Right. I think that's the pathway to it. I think you're right. A lot of some junior high people, they don't have the kind of self-consciousness. They just have fun with it. But you're right. I think early high school, some more self-consciousness seeps in. I think you're exactly right. A lot of the house competitions, the way to be successful is essentially not to worry so much about success, but to have fun and not to worry about how you're looking. I think a lot of people would date the resurgence of Athens, maybe even to that cheer, to that moment. There was so much buzz about that cheer. I think that might have got Athens jump-started once again. Ashlan, you're the house leader now of Athens, before our year was cut short, unfortunately, Athens was in fact leading in the House Cup standings for the first time ever in the history of the House system. What has that been like?
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, no, Athens has not only never won, they've never been in the lead before this year. Tell me about your experience as a house leader, and how you've helped, you and others, of course, Ellie and Tristan deserve credit, Jack and many others in your house deserve credit for getting Athens to where it is now. can you talk about why you wanted to be a house leader and how you sought to help Athens get to where it is now?
I guess I'll give like a brief overview of like my experience in the house, because I do remember like one of the most distinct things I remember. Of course, I don't have a great memory, but I remember Athens, like even from my first year. My first year, we were the house that loses, and we were perfectly fine with it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it kind of, I feel like even that was a good platform for us to start off of,
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't really, I don't know, it's kind of a contradiction. Like, we didn't care that other people thought we looked dumb because we weren't trying, but we also almost didn't want to try because, I don't know, I don't think we didn't want to try because we thought we were going to look dumb. But anyways, I remember like how nice everyone was when I first came. Like, the people in my house were some of my first friends, and even if I didn't know them super well, they were all welcoming. I remember Ben as a house head. He was really nice. And everyone was just so laid back that year, and that kind of, it felt like I had a place, like, I don't know, where I could just kind of relax, you know? And the second year, Ellie and Tristan were the house heads. Ellie was house head, and Tristan was the house assistant. And they were two of my closest friends. And I really, really liked, I think this is one of the reasons I wanted to be a house leader. I really liked how dedicated they were to the house and how much they cared about it, even if they weren't, like, they never got upset if we lost, unless it was just about like the mechanics of it or like how the judging came out. Of course, we had our like angry moments, but they were always so, you know, Ellie, like, you know how nice she is, and she was always kind to us. And she brought us snacks, and that's something that I wanted to continue. And Ellie and Tristan, they made my day so many times, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to be house head. I didn't want to run after my first year because I felt I wasn't ready for it. But after my second year, I felt like I'd been kind of shown what to do because I'd hung out with them so much, and I think part of that was intentional on their part.
Sure.
Yeah, basically inspired by Ellie and Tristan is most of the answer to that question. And then the second part of it, I kind of wanted to take what they'd started in making, what they'd done essentially is make the house a pleasant place to spend time. And place by place, I mean people, like increasing Athens' pride. And I wanted to take that and kind of put that into competitions. Like, we already kind of enjoyed competitions, but we didn't win. So I wanted to see if we could win more. And we could. So yeah,
Wow.
but I think a lot of the reason I became a house head was on the part of Ellie and Tristan and what they started.
That's fantastic. That's exactly how it's supposed to work, that kind of torch being passed. And yeah, Ben, Ellie, Tristan, they've all done a great job with that. And now, you're a senior now, and I think, it's just, it's really a shame, of course, that we weren't able to finish the house year, but congratulations on a great year for Athens, and thank you so much for your wonderful leadership of that house. I think what you helped with Athens, I think you and Jack both have helped Athens say, like, we can have a good time, but we can also win, maybe. Like,
exactly. We can have a good time winning.
We can have a good time also by winning. Like, but that you do have to kind of step out of your comfort zone, and you have to invest a little bit more to really try and to really go for it. You have to risk something, but you guys have led them to that point, and thanks so much for that.
Thank you, Mr. Mathwin.
I want to transition now to talking about your senior thesis. One of the things, one of the really highlights of the year that we're going to miss almost certainly is the senior thesis presentations. some of our viewers may not know, but each of our seniors writes a long paper that they have to defend before a panel, and many students come to these presentations. It's a huge school event. So I've asked Mrs. Mathwin to kind of highlight some of the best senior theses that we could talk about. And no surprise, Ashlan, that she suggested she pick yours. But of course, I've had the privilege of advising Ashlan on her senior thesis, so I knew it was very good. Congratulations on an excellent thesis, Ashlan.
Thank you so much. And thank you for advising me and taking all that time to talk with me about the paper.
You're very welcome. So, Ashlan, you wrote about the problems of the fast fashion industry, as it is known. Can you give our audience about a 1-minute summary of your paper, what it's about, and then why you chose to write on this topic?
Okay. How shall I do this in about 1 minute? Okay. Basically, in the past few decades, there's been something that has developed in the fashion industry called fast fashion. So it's a business model where companies, large companies now, they have their clothes manufactured often overseas in countries like China, Vietnam, India, Bangladesh. Those are some of the big ones. That way they're able to do it cheaply, quickly. They mass produce clothing, but in like smaller batches. So they change their offerings frequently in stores. And it's cheap clothing because they have it manufactured cheaply, because people aren't being paid all that much, and it doesn't take a lot to make the materials either. So this clothing, what I'm saying in my paper basically is there's 3 main problems with this industry. One, the labor problems. The environments in which a lot of the people in this industry work in manufacturing they're dangerous. I think some of the most striking things I read about were the lack of exits in some of these factories, and how a building collapsed and killed over 1,000 people. And the second problem is pollution. I think it's the second most polluting industry in the world. And then the third problem is, I think it really kind of decreases the value of clothing. Like, clothing can be so much more than just something that you wear once or twice and then throw away. So that's pretty much the 3 arguments that I make.
Yeah. I think when we were starting to talk about this, of course, this was a topic I really I knew nothing about. But you were saying, rewind the clock, of course, clothing companies, you have your fall line, your winter line, but now some companies at least are going through, changing out the racks every 2 weeks or so. Is that correct?
Right. Sometimes even like once a week, or maybe even less. I'm not really sure what the exact number is, but I think one of the biggest fast fashion companies' policies, Inditex, they change their clothing out about twice a week. I mean, once every 2 weeks.
Yes. Now, what got you interested in writing about this topic?
I don't remember what the first thing that got me interested in it was. I know that I came across a YouTube channel about fast fashion, and it was just some like quick facts, and then she did more in-depth videos about it. I thought it was really interesting, and I liked clothes, and I liked clothes shopping.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go like every week or every 2 weeks or anything like that, but I definitely have always kind of taken an interest in fashion. Perhaps not a strong interest, but I'm also really interested in like business ethics, and like corporate management, stuff like that. So it was kind of the perfect intersection. And it was kind of an issue. I thought I would get bored of it, but I couldn't drop it, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think, one of the things that interested me about your paper was the So you have the right, the kind of the labor issue, the environmental issue, but then you took an interesting turn, kind of with your third argument, to talk about its kind of effect even on the consumer. So maybe you could say, the consumer wins if they lose, but you even seem to argue that the consumer loses too in this kind of exchange. That this isn't just us getting a good deal on clothes, rather like something else kind of more fundamental at a kind of subconscious, maybe even spiritual level is going on. Can you talk about that? Why is this practice even bad for those that buy the clothes?
Basically my train of thought on this one was clothing. It's always been something that people have communicated through, and that's part of the reason that fast fashion grew to be such a big deal, was because like people had more easy access to clothing that appeared like trendy, so a big appeal for young shoppers. But kind of what happened was, first of all, the fast fashion designers, because they have to make clothing so quickly, were like ripping off other designers. And so it kind of just led to this cycle of what I think I called it like parasitism, basically, because first of all, they're like preying off of the workers, and then they're preying off of other designers, but it could benefit the top and the high end designers too, weirdly. But I think the main thing on the consumer end was clothing should be more meaningful than just something you choose, wear a couple times and throw away. Like, I believe that it should be valued more. And the studies I looked at said that a lot of fast fashion clothing was thrown away after just a couple times, or that if it wasn't thrown away, people hoarded it even when they thought it didn't have any value to them anymore. And the main thing was they didn't think it had value, and they just didn't want to throw it away or give it away because they felt bad about it, but they didn't want to donate something that they didn't think had value. And I think for something that you're representing yourself with, clothing, you should take the time and thought to choose something that you're not going to throw away.
Yes, I think that's really an interesting point, Ashlan, this idea of clothing as a form of communication, clothing as a kind of, like you say, like dignity in your apparel reflects kind of something about your we might say your self-image or your perception of your own dignity. It was a really interesting twist you took on the issue that could have just stayed kind of with some of the environmental or labor issues. So kudos to you on that. It was really an interesting process, and I learned a lot too.
Oh, thank you.
So briefly though, Ashlan, since you may or may not have a panel, to respond to a kind of interrogation, panel questioning some of your points, I'm going to, if it's all right with you, let's pretend I'm a panel member now, and let me fire a couple questions out at you.
Okay, this should be interesting.
All right. Okay, Ashlan, so your paper points out some problems with, the fashion industry. And for a moment, let's just say that I accept those problems. But those problems, in many ways, look a lot like early industrialization for other, first world economies now, United States, England, it just looks like the early industrial revolution in those countries. Now, that was painful, but they grew out of that, and now we're at a different place. Isn't what's happening now just a kind of necessary, although painful, first step in building a first world economy? So maybe it's not, it's not what's happening isn't great, but there's no other way to do it. It's like what you have to do to get on their feet. So we shouldn't stop them, because if we stop them, we'll be hindering their development. What would you say to that?
I think something that could perhaps be a solution to this problem is engaging in trade with these countries, or allowing them to engage in trade with others, but it would have to be with something that isn't environmentally draining, and doesn't like drain their resources, and that includes human resources. One of the studies I looked at for this paper was on how air pollution impacts productivity, and that was in a call center in China. And this study found that pollution decreased workers' productivity as air pollution increased. And this is in a call center. So I'm kind of thinking, if this is a call center, like what happens to the workers that are dealing with chemicals firsthand without any proper protective equipment? So I think that, yes, countries do need to engage in trade with other countries in order to grow. And that's not something we can ignore. But I also think that this kind of business, these kinds of manufacturing methods definitely leave the countries kind of drained. And we shouldn't, I don't think there's any excuse to ruin another country to this extent, even if it's just like one region. And all this pollution, let me just mention, it's not just staying over there. Like, it gets leaked into international waters. So I think basically we would have to just look at alternate options, but I don't think that economic growth, like short-term economic growth, should not be an excuse to kind of leave the country with like long-lasting pollution issues and ruin the health of the people that are working in it. I don't think we should consider those workers as expendable, even if it takes some time to figure another solution out. Does that answer your question?
Sure, yeah. And now, coming out of my panelist mode, I stumbled upon another study that talked about pollution and productivity. One thing I liked about your paper was you talk about, look, if you actually, it wasn't, shall we say, anti-growth. It was a paper that was trying to say the best way to growth is to install kind of sustainable practices. Okay, but one more question. I'll go back into panelist mode. All right, Ashlan. So you have this. You have these practices that are done, right? But they're done for a reason. They're done. People buy the clothes because they want to buy them. Workers work in the factories because, obviously they must want to work in them. It must be better than other alternatives. And so this is the situation that the market has produced, and what the market produces is a product of human choices across in America, in overseas, wherever it may be. Who's to say that why should we regulate or stop people from choosing to engage in these practices? Let people buy the clothes they want to buy, even if it's not good for them. Let people work where they want to work, even if it's maybe not the best place for them to work. As long as it's their choice, we have to live with it, because the alternative is to control people's choices. What would you say to that argument?
I think what I would say to that one is, I think a lot of consumers, given the choice to buy an ethically made product that they could afford, they would choose that product. I think one of the issues with ethical fashion some of the time is that it's more expensive because people are being paid living wages. So I don't think we should be allowed, just as with like crime, like you wouldn't just let people steal food. Like, you're not going to let people get away with doing that, even if they can't afford it, which sometimes is sad because they need to eat. But for companies which are making a lot of money, and people in America, in countries like America, where a lot of us, we could afford to be shopping somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Even if it's something like a thrift store or something like that. Of course, I know a lot of people don't want to do that, but I think the thing is, like, you don't let people get away with other kinds of crimes. And so I think this should be treated with the same weight. I think there are other options to produce clothing that people like. And even if that takes a couple years or a couple decades to kind of change the way clothing is viewed so that people put more thought into it and choose more carefully, I hope it doesn't take a couple of decades.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think exploiting workers, I don't think that should be taken lightly. And if people choose things knowing that it was produced unethically, I think that's a problem too. And it's something like we don't always think about. And I think one of the main problems is, even if we know that it happens, we don't know that it's happening specifically with the companies or products that we engage with. So I think most people will stop shopping at a place if they know something unethical is going on in the production. But for a lot of companies, it's not like made clear. I think if people read more business journalism, maybe we would have less of a problem. But I don't think everybody's going to sit around doing that all day. I certainly won't.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. Thank you, Ashlan. I do hope maybe something can happen over the summer. Maybe we can have a senior thesis day, and we'll see. But thanks for giving us at least a brief sneak peek about your paper. And if we're fortunate, maybe we'll be able to see you in action a little later. But thank you, Ashlan. It's been great to have you join us today as a guest. I've really I've appreciated your time and appreciated your thoughts on the Advantis experience.
It's been great to talk these things through with you.
Have a great day, Ashlan. Thanks again for joining us. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us again for another episode. Take care.